Namaste. You're watching the fourth episode of the MidVibe. I'm Ashna Juneja, and I bring to you one person each week who's at the middle of his or her own journey towards that one big dream. Today I have with me Siddharth Ananthram. I first learned about him from another podcast wherein he was talking about how to have meaningful conversations. Ever since then, my love for podcasts as well as for conversations has increased even further. If you're interested in the same question as I was at that time, which is how to have meaningful conversations, please continue to watch this video.
Hi.
I'm so glad that we finally connected after so many schedule plans.
Yeah, likewise.
I've just been avidly following your work on Instagram, not like a stalker, but I just love it.
Thank
So
you. I
how are
appreciate it.
you doing?
I am doing great. Today has been. I love the rain. It's been.
Raining there?
Yeah, it's raining. It was raining quite a bit. Not right now, but early in the morning and throughout the afternoon, it was raining quite a bit. And growing up as a kid, I always used to hate rainy days just because
I
I would hate
love
getting wet.
rain. Okay.
I would hate getting wet. I would love to sit inside and just enjoy the
Uh-huh.
rainy day, but not like go out. But now you can't really go outside, right? Even if you go, like you don't have a choice.
Yeah.
So I love the rain. I'm beginning to love it again.
That's nice. Delhi is pathetic. You can't step out. It's so hot. It's so humid.
I can imagine at this time of the year, Delhi's its worst, huh?
Yeah, it is. It truly is. Okay. So diving right into our conversation,
Mm-hmm.
I firstly, I want to tell you this one thing that when I heard about how to have meaningful conversations on that podcast by Bijay, I actually, wrote down certain pointers that I loved about that conversation, and I actually posted it on my Insta story also, like for
I
people to
remember.
hear it out. And the first thing that really intrigued me was that be interested instead of being interesting.
Yeah,
So, could you elaborate on that?
sure. So, the truth of the matter is, I think in today's world, we've been so trained to just look around and everyone's trying to add a new skill to their list. Everyone's trying to add a new title to their Instagram bio. Everyone's trying to
Yeah.
add a new achievement to their LinkedIn bio, to just ultimately come off as someone who's more interesting to the other
Mm.
person, right?
Yeah.
And I find it interesting, in my personal experience at least, that the more interested you are in someone,
Hmm.
the more interesting you become. And I think
What
that
is that?
has been, yeah, and the more interested you are in someone else, you establish a human relationship which goes far beyond titles and designations and all the other things that you can add in your bio. And let me give you a
Mm.
simple example of what that means, right? And one of the simplest ways of do this is you can see it in an introduction with someone,
Yeah.
right? Normally when you go to meet, especially at these conferences and these events and stuff, and you meet someone, um, the first question you will probably, if you meet a bump into a stranger, the first thing you will say is, hey, what do you do?
Mm,
You never
right.
start with
Right. Yeah.
who are you or whatever, right? And then the person literally will end up replying with their CV, or either what designation they're holding, or whatever
Mm.
they're holding. Now the thing of the interesting thing about that is that often you won't even remember beyond the first two sentences what the person said. You won't remember
Yeah.
what the person's actually. Whereas if you really are interested and you share, hey, who are you? Not by based on your
Yeah.
title and your designation, not what you do, but who are you as a person. I'm sure you will remember so much more about the person. For example, I don't know if you remember, I don't even care if you remember any of the other things about what I do, but all you need to know at the end of this conversation is that I love potatoes. I can have save puri for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and Manchester United is my favorite football team. I'm sure these are the three things you will remember, irrespective of whatever else you remember about me,
That's so
right?
true.
So I think that right there is where the whole thing starts, right? How can you be interested in someone else beyond all their designations and titles, so that you can come off as interesting if you want to, that is.
And that's so true because, especially in our generation, if you see, if I go to a party or like a social gathering, everyone's talking about what is it that they're trying out new. Like, everyone's just into themselves. They're just self-indulging. And when I actually first heard this line in your podcast, I was like blown. I was like, this is so true. This was like a slap on my face. And this also was something I resonated so much with, because I am a person who always listens a lot. And, and that listener friend basically. So it really hit me
Nice.
hard, because what about people like me who are always interested, but we never get the chance to talk about because other people are not just good listeners? Do you see the flip side of it?
I have a friend who said this exact same thing to me. Exactly the question that you asked, right? What happens to the people who are always listening? Because they're just great at it, that they end up being in a place where they need someone to be interested in what they have to say as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right, totally. I think we need a balance of both, and the only way the balance can be made is if there are not just a few people listening, if there are more people listening actively, so you have more people to speak to, right? Honestly,
Yeah.
because that's the problem. Everyone wants to speak, but very few people want to listen, right?
Yeah.
If we can shift that balance a little bit, I think that's one way. Or second, I guess is probably writing and journaling when you have a
That's
lot
true. Yeah.
to basically express.
I actually maintain a gratitude journal because I'm so bad at like journaling stuff. Because when it comes to like writing down, I can't find the words, or I'm just so overwhelmed. I'm inundated with feelings. I can't put down things on paper then.
Interesting. You should probably. I think the one thing that has helped me at least is I think the whole feelings also comes with its own baggage, like just the word
Yeah.
feelings,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
instead of just I've been especially doing this lockdown exercise. I've been doing this one exercise, which is every morning I wake up and I just try to write down not what I'm feeling, but overall mental state: positive, negative, neutral. So that it takes
Okay.
away the baggage of exactly trying to place it. And then over a course of time, when you start doing it for long enough, you're like, okay, am I feeling positive today? Am I feeling like a neutral state today? Am I feeling a negative state today? That over time, you'll start becoming more and more curious with what is that positive state because of, and then you can point it down to a feeling. So it's just like more like
Yeah.
gamifying it, and it takes away the baggage from trying to put it down an emotion to it. So try it. I don't know, it might help.
Makes sense. I mean, I should try it out once at least. Okay. When you say that, I mean, I obviously, whatever I'm going to talk about in this conversation is always in reference with what I've heard about you or what I've heard you speaking about, because that's
Sure.
what intrigued me, right? So,
Sure.
when you said that silent conversations are more meaningful, I get the gist of it, but I really want you to elaborate as to why they're meaningful.
So I don't think it's silent conversations that are meaningful, but I feel it's the silences in a
Okay.
conversation that are meaningful. I'll tell you what I mean by that. What makes really powerful music is not
Mm.
the rhythm, but
Yeah.
it's the gap in between two notes. It's
That's
it's
true.
the
Yeah.
gap in between those two notes that makes a song what it is. It makes a note what it is, right?
Mm.
Similar to that, in a conversation, it's those moments of silences where where thoughts, a lot of different thoughts, a lot of different mental chatter is coming up for both the people, which they're processing, and
Yeah.
where both the people recognize that there is a lot happening, and they extend that silence for a few more minutes, is when you're able to convert those thoughts into something that really matters to you in that moment. Because otherwise what happens is that um, you end up sharing what's right here on the surface. Whereas when you give that
Mm.
additional moment of silence, you go a few levels deeper into what's really happening for you. And by silence, I'm not saying you have to be silent throughout, but
Yeah.
you can start off as simply as saying, in this conversation, when I hear you speak, instead of immediately replying to you, what if I gave 5 seconds more, 10 seconds more? That makes the conversation so much more beautiful and effective. And the second thing about silences is that, you know like just like the whole thing about us being interested instead of interesting,
Mm.
what happens in a silence is that through silences you're not waiting to just wait for the other person to finish to respond.
Mm.
You are giving a few seconds to let what that person has said simmer for you, for the other person as well. And when it simmers, you know, when anything simmers, food gets better, right? So you
Yeah.
let it simmer, and the more you let it simmer, the more it hits home.
That makes so much sense. Wow. Have you heard of love languages?
Yes, I have.
I want
Totally
you to
with
talk
you.
about the interplay of love language in a conversation.
Beautiful question. You know, that's such an interesting mix of
Yeah.
things. I learned about love languages, I think almost 5 years back at this point. Yeah, about 5 years back at this point. And when I read the book, and it really changed my perspective completely. It was one of those books that, you know, once you read it, you're like, it's like when you see it, you can't unsee it,
Yeah,
right?
true. Yeah.
Suddenly patterns in how I speak to my parents, my friends, everyone are like, oh shit, now it all makes sense because this person's love language is this, right?
Clicks.
How could I not see it? It's like, yeah, exactly. uh, I think for me, what I've realized is, for example, my best friends, two of my best friends, one of their love languages is acts of service, and the other one's love
Okay.
language is gifts. Very
Oh.
different, very different, right? So I know that when I approach, me being a great friend means differently to both of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my love language is quality time, of course, right? So just knowing this has increased our friendship and made our conversations even better, because with this person with acts of service, I know that this person does not care too much if I have a really, really great conversation and spend a lot of time, because what really matters to this person is if I can help this person in some way or the other through acts of service.
Yeah.
Whereas with this person with gifts, I know that on their birthdays, I'm very bad at giving gifts otherwise, but on this person's birthday, I have to go like all the way. I'll do whatever it takes to like
Yeah.
find the gifts that really makes a difference in this person's life. And then we'll
Yeah.
have a great conversation about it. But I know that the conversation cannot precede the gift, right? When
Yeah.
it comes to me, both of them know that once in a week, we will, and we are also roommates where we live in Malaysia. So, you know,
Wow.
once at least in a week, we'll sit together either by the pool or in our balcony, and we'll just have a great conversation because they know that that's how they're expressing love to me. So yeah, I think that's just how it plays out, and I think that plays out in our I think it plays out so beautifully in our relationships with our parents. Like
Wow.
for example,
Like
my
example, I
dad's
mean.
uh, our parents have always expressed love to us, right?
Yeah.
In their own ways,
Mm-hmm.
and we express love to them as well. But knowing, for example, that my dad's love language is acts of service.
Mm.
Earlier, as a kid, probably I would get annoyed, like why do I need to help you with this? Like, why can't I do it? Like, you know,
Yeah.
obviously as a kid, right? Whereas now, the moment I realize, okay, that's his love language. By
Mm-hmm.
doing this, it's me expressing love to him.
Yeah.
Suddenly changes the equation, because in your head you're like, oh, this is me expressing love. You know, it makes you more compassionate, it makes you more grounded. And I think the other thing I have to say about love languages also is, I think I love you is not the only way people express love,
Mm, that is
right?
true.
There are
Yeah.
so many other things, even in a conversation, that, for example, when you wake up and your mom says, have you had coffee? That is her
Yeah.
expressing love. Right? Have
Right.
you had your food? That is her expressing love as well. So what happens when you start listening for love? Your conversations start becoming all the
Yeah.
more beautiful. And it does not just come down to, I love you, you know?
True. It's just the little acts that you do. You just have to be very receptive to those very small acts, and that's when you'll know that you are being loved.
And coming back to what we started with, right? It ensures that you're always um, interested in the person. When you express
That's so true.
love in the
Yes.
language,
Yes.
in the language of the person that you are in a close relationship, you always ensure that you're interested in what really matters to this person,
Right.
instead of just. And I think that's also the biggest things that you see even in friendships and stuff like that, is when we end up expressing love in the way we like love to be expressed to us,
Yeah.
right? So we think that the best way like for me, I always used to think that the best way for me to show love to someone else is by spending quality time with them, because just because I used to
Mm.
That's my love language, but it's not
Yeah.
necessarily theirs.
That's the biggest mistake I think people make.
Absolutely. What's your love language?
I'm so confused about it because I love quality time, but I also like gifts. So I think my dominant one is quality time. I think so. What about yours?
Uh-huh. Mine is quality time, 100%.
So people somehow deny the very importance and significance of having a conversation with themselves.
Hmm.
So what do you have to say about that?
I think the conversations with the self are the conversations that matter the most.
Exactly.
Um, and often it's the ones that we are most afraid of having as well.
That's so
Um,
true. Yes.
right. And I think that more and more we're living in a world where mental health is becoming such an important part of all of our lives.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that if the more and more we realize that if we can only pay more focused attention to these conversations that happen inside us, without either trying to push them to either sides or trying to go in loops and cycles. And I know probably for some people it's easier said than done,
Yeah.
but I think for me, I always think in simplest. What is the simplest step, right? And for me, the simplest step when it comes to conversations with yourself is just, which is why I love journaling so much, like writing it down, like whatever is on your mind, writing down your thoughts, especially during difficult times. Like, for example, when I have fights, when I'm really angry, when I'm really upset with someone, I've built up this habit now of having a conversation with myself by writing, like expressing everything that's on my mind, but just writing it down at that particular instance. And by doing that, I'm having this conversation with myself. I'm able to read it. I'm able to see what's happening. And the moment I do that, I leave that situation feeling a whole lot lighter than I entered it. Right. And I think that's what conversations with self do. We walk around with this huge bag filled with so much mental weight,
Yeah.
and conversations with self just help you unload and feel a few grams, kilograms lighter once you
Yeah.
actually have them. But it's just for different people. I think different people have it differently. I have it either by speaking it out loud to myself while especially while working out. I have these conversations with myself, or I write, right? Whereas for some people, I know I have a friend who loves having these conversations with herself while listening to really good music. Like she finds, like in music, she finds words to her thoughts. And and that's another way to have. So it's about finding what is a way that you like to have those conversations with yourself, and to have them actively instead of trying to, you know um, pack that bag and make it heavier.
The thing is, I tried to write my feelings when I tried. I would say I haven't accomplished it because every time I'm so angry or when I'm so sad about something, even though I have my pen and book always on my side table with that hope that someday I might just write, I never get down to it because at that moment, at that heat of the moment, I'm just not able to gather that motivation, courage, and I'm just not in that mood. So how do you
So
like?
what do you so tell me, what is something that makes you feel like makes you like lets you sigh and lets you say ha, like that feeling of like ha, you know what
Yeah.
is something that you do that gives you that feeling?
For me, it's talking
Uh-huh.
and to the same person with whom I fought. So like if
Hmm.
I have a fight with you, I would want to talk to you about that fight. But what if the other person isn't in the mood for it? Then that just screws up the stuff for me, right? So that's a
Hmm.
very, very challenging moment for me.
So it's okay. Find someone who apart from that person who you can just speak to at that a
Yeah.
particular moment.
Yeah.
For me, I have two such people who know that at any point of time, if I'm like, guys, I need to talk, like let's talk, kind of thing,
Yeah.
and they know, okay, something's up, and we'll just have a conversation. Then when the writing also does not work, that's the next thing I resort to. But I'm guessing you, like me, are an extrovert, right? So we need to talk it
Yeah.
out.
Exactly. So talking about conversations only right now because
Hmm.
we are in this COVID scenario, virtually connecting. How do you have meaningful conversations virtually at work? That's one
Hmm.
question I have, like, for this current scenario.
So it's tough. I have to admit it is tough, and it's especially for workmates, because there is a pressure of work, and
Exactly.
there is the need to connect meaningfully, and there is a third element, which is that you're now the same space becomes your bedroom, becomes your your working room, becomes your workout room, it becomes all of that, right? So there's this element of space as well that comes into the picture, and that gets on your mind. But as recently as yesterday, I work with a team which is completely virtual. So I work with a team which is where people are from 7 different countries, and so many different time zones, right? So just yesterday, I said, okay, it's been a really amazing but really tough 3 months for everyone on this team. Um, so I said, and we've only spoken about work. We haven't really connected meaningfully. So I hosted like a virtual hangout where we played
Okay.
a game, and the game was simply it's actually a game that I've designed, but it's a set of cards. Think of them as, instead of cards against humanity, think of these cards as cards for humanity, where
Oh,
each card has a question, has a fun
okay.
question. So now no one is left to really think about what they should ask the other person. They just pick up a card, and whatever comes up, they just share and respond to that question in the group. Some questions are lighter, some questions go a little deeper, some questions probe you further, some questions are like fun, like questions like popcorn or M&M, and
Okay.
people choose. So
Yeah.
I think for me, that's what I did. And yet it was such an amazing, like incredible 90 minutes yesterday. Like all of us laughed our asses off, and we got to know so much about each other that we probably didn't know after having worked with each other for almost a year and a half at this point, right?
Mhm.
So I think the short answer to your question is, find, if we really want, I think we can all find ways to gamify the experience of connecting meaningfully. I think it's not the tools that we are lacking. I think it's the intention.
Where can
You
I
know,
find this game of yours, Cards for Humanity?
No, so it's actually called Let's Talk. The
Okay.
card game is literally called Let's Talk, and I am releasing it this Sunday. In fact, we're having a game night where
Okay.
about 36 or 37 different strangers, almost 40 different strangers have registered for it. We're hosting our first ever
Wow.
game night, and 40 strangers from all different places are going to come together to play this game together, and just going to
Wow.
find out about each other's stories, experiences, what's in their mind, all of that through a card game. And I'm really excited for it. Really excited.
Sounds very exciting. I mean, it's so full of energy, I think. Uh, you already shared the recipe for conversations, like a meaningful conversation, but I want you to repeat it here because I think that's the very important message I really want my audience to know from you.
Sure. I think just the background to that is, I felt like in my TEDx talk, what I was trying to get to the heart of was, how do you make any conversation meaningful? And I said, I want to approach this from the analogy of cooking a yummy dish,
Mm.
right? For cooking a yummy dish, you need two things. You need a set of ingredients, the right
Yeah.
ingredients,
Mm.
and you need a recipe that's been tried and tested and it works again and again and again, right? So I first shared the ingredients, and I found again and again that these are the top three ingredients that make any conversation meaningful. And those ingredients are, the first one is honesty. When you can be completely blatantly honest in any conversation, even if it's at the expense of you, if you think that it's going to hurt someone else, but as long as you're being honest, right? I think it always makes any conversation yummier, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Second is vulnerability. Like it's when you're able to express all of your thoughts and feelings, put it on the table, take the risk of doing that, because it is risky, because you don't know what will happen through by doing that in the conversation, but you do that anyway,
Yeah.
right? You go few levels deeper into any conversation that you have. So if that means, you are feeling really shitty, and you're speaking to your boss on a particular day, right? Most of us think that, oh, it's the wrong thing to do, it's not professional. But being vulnerable in that particular situation means really telling your boss, hey boss, I'm having a really bad day today, and here's why,
Yeah.
right? And I'm And I promise you, like, your boss will feel that levels of empathy and compassion way more, or at least will give you a little bit of slack for whatever that's happening. And I feel like most people don't even, like, completely avoid that, right? So that's the second ingredient, which is vulnerability. And third one is perspective. If we enter conversations with the intention that we want to see the world through a different lens, like everyone, in my opinion, wears specs. I mean, I wear physically, but like everyone's wearing it because they're shaped and molded by a certain sense of beliefs and values. And for me, a conversation like this is a beautiful way to exchange our pair of glasses, to look at the world through your eyes, and so that's the third ingredient for me. So as long as you have honesty, vulnerability, and perspective, and if you're looking for these intentionally, any conversation, you will make it meaningful. Now, of course, you can't just have the right ingredients, but you also need a recipe that works, right?
Yeah.
And so I found that in my experience of having these conversations, of doing it with multiple sets of people over the years, there is 6 steps to this thing, right? And I'm going to share one by one. The first one is a check-in. For me, a check-in is probably one of the most important things that we forget today, because we are living in such a fast-paced world where we are like jumping between conversations, between being on our phone to
Yeah.
entering a meeting, all of that, right? So we're often stuck either thinking about what happened before entering a conversation or what's going to happen after this conversation. For me, a check-in is like a way for us to really get present and enter the conversation and arrive into the conversation instead of jumping in.
Wow. Yes.
So like, for what you did beautifully right at the start of this conversation, you're like, so how are you, right? Or like, I like one of the questions I like asking is, hey, so what's on your mind today?
Yeah.
It's just suddenly you pause, you're like, yeah, what's on my mind right now? That's a check-in, right? So for me, that's the first step. The second one is open-ended questions. Ask open-ended questions. These are not like yes or no questions. These are more why, how, or what kind of questions. And that's also kind of what the game does. The game I was talking to you about, Let's Talk, is filled with about 100 such why, how, what questions that you can just ask when you're in any social gathering, basically. So instead of you having to think about it, the game just makes it even simpler for you. But all of us have questions that we want to ask, right? And that instantly basically adds a level of curiosity to any conversation. Third one is basically this thing that I feel that every conversation has a certain element of ego in it. It's like the elephant in the room. When you have conversations which is filled with this ego without removing this elephant, conversations are not that much fun. But one of the favorite ways for me to remove this ego from the room in any conversation that I have is by inviting stories. Like, tell me a story about X, or like, when was the last time you did this? Or, do you remember when this happened? All of those are stories, right? And the moment you do that, suddenly that ego gets silenced, because like, we are wired for stories, right? And the moment you do that, people like go into this world of stories, and that's it. Your conversation becomes again so much more delicious. So I think those are 3 things, and the fourth one is the one that we already kind of spoke about, which is silence. Silence is probably the most forgotten element of any conversation, like, because people are always talking, and there's just very few moments of gaps where nothing is said, but so much is expressed. The fifth step is probably the thing that prevents most conversations from being ineffective, which is that ultimately a conversation is a tool for people to both understand and be understood. And the moment you be a mirror to someone in a conversation, which is the fifth step, you allow for that to happen. And being a mirror simply comes down to, when you say something to me, I just respond saying, hey, what I hear you say is, what I think you're saying is.
It's like paraphrasing.
Pretty much paraphrasing, pretty much reflecting. So if you were saying this to a mirror and the mirror had to reflect it back to you, what would it say? Now, the moment you do that, I give you the opportunity to to be understood, and by asking that, I'm understanding what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other person also feels like he is being heard.
Exactly.
That's like an
And
additional point.
everyone ultimately just wants to be seen, heard, and understood.
Yes.
That's all. This whole world with everything in it, everyone just wants these three things, right? And you
True.
have the simplest tool through conversations to do that. And then the final step is, of course, um, just like you started off with a check-in, which helps you arrive into the conversation. Check out, which helps you leave that conversation with either an insight or a perspective or simply a reflection, right? And a checkout could simply sound like this, right? If you have a conversation, you're like, so what I really loved about this conversation was,
Hmm.
when you say that, you suddenly trick your brain to remember what you really loved about it, and that you will never forget that
Yeah.
conversation anymore.
That's so true. Yeah.
So that's just the 6-step recipe, pretty much, um, that I follow all the time, and it's proven to work. And so I hope this is useful to everyone who's listening as well.
I think you should write a book on this. Because I think genuinely people out there need to know this. If everybody is aware of this simple thing, things will be so easy. Everything's going to be so smooth.
That means a ton. And yeah, maybe, I mean, for sure it's in the cards, but like, by saying it, you're making it even more real for me, so I appreciate it. Thank you. And um, to respond to what you said around more people should know it, that's actually my what I'm most excited about, to get this message out to as many people as possible, to ultimately, because for me, as an outcome of that, what happens is, uh, the world becomes more compassionate and more
Yeah.
connected.
Yeah.
And for me, real change begins one conversation at a time, one meaningful conversation at a time, where two people are connecting because they really want to connect and get to know what it means, like what it feels like to be in the other person's, not just shoes, but to understand, and like I said, to be understood, right? So those are the
Hmm.
ultimate objectives and the goals. And for me, uh, yeah, that's just my dream, to be able to create spaces, games, whatever I can do, and probably a book too in the future, right? I don't know, but yeah.
I heard this somewhere as well that three things are very important, and you can say like these are the three necessities every human being requires: food, shelter, and stories.
Absolutely. We're wired for stories.
Yeah.
Like, we sat as human beings around fires and listened to our, forefathers and grandfathers. Like, he just spoke into the late hours of the night.
Yeah.
And, that was the way we were brought up. And I think, um, we need to do more of that. Yeah.
So, is Life Circles, which is your found organization, is that the right
Initiative,
word?
organization. Yeah.
Initiative.
Whatever you like to call it. Yeah.
Organization, if I have to say. Is it
Go for it.
related to this very purpose that you mentioned that people should have more meaningful conversations? What all is about? It's about.
Absolutely. So Life Circles is trying to revive, in a nutshell, is trying to revive what we did as ancient human beings, which is sat around fires and spoke about the things that mattered to us. So honestly, it's not something very, very new. It's something that we've done for so long, but have forgotten over the process. But it's what we try to do is we're trying to unite people who who are passionate and who are curious about talking about the things that really matter on their mind, finding clarity, not just through reading books and through reading podcasts and all of that, but also by sharing their stories with other people and getting perspectives from other people's stories that they can apply on theirs. And so
Mm.
ultimately, what Life Circles is it's think of it as a new school for your well-being, where
Yeah.
we are uniting people whose priority is their own well-being, and they're willing to learn and get perspectives and become more and more clear from other people's stories, from other people's lessons, from other people's um, perspectives about life. And so we host games, we host online workshops, we also host a lot of different online circles where we bring
Mm.
strangers together. We host intimate spaces, so it's always intimate. It's never more than it's never one of those 100 multi
Yeah.
thousands of hundreds of people events. It's always going to be intimate because that's for us is sacred. And we create a space where people can talk about the things on their mind on different topics, from their emotions to their um, mental health, to their um, relationships, to their stories, to even stuff like what's like work and their passions, to their character, to all of these different things about our life that uh, that is so intrinsic to who we are. Yet there are very few people who we actually get to talk about it with.
Yeah. Mm.
So our goal is to be able to create these spaces so that ultimately people end up leading a more compassionate, connected, and a lighter life, where they leave with this feeling of I think I feel
Mm.
so much lighter than when I walked in. That's our ultimate goal. And so far, yeah, every
That's
person who's attended so far tells us that in some shape or form. So I'm very excited.
that's beautiful. That's actually a very, very beautiful thought that goes into it. It's very nice.
Thank you. Yeah, and I know you were going to join us for our last retreat, right? Before this
July,
whole COVID
Goa
thing
one,
happened.
sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, we were. I was really looking forward to Goa till this whole COVID thing happened.
Yeah.
But now once COVID gets done, I'm looking forward to seeing when we can host the next retreat. That's the other thing we do. We also host retreats,
Yeah.
and the retreats are pretty much our favorite things to do because they happen in like some of the most exquisite, like amazing locations in India, and it brings together such an amazing, like I call them like-hearted group of people, because everyone's on the same energy, same vibe. Because I think everyone's looking for like-minded people, and what our retreats do is bring together like-hearted people.
Like-hearted people. Wow. That's so sweet. Uh, Before I conclude this conversation, I want to ask you, what's that one thing that you loved about this conversation?
Oh, I
I'm
love it.
basically following
Uh,
the last step of your recipe.
so I loved a few different things. First of all, I loved that it was a conversation. I felt like most other podcasts, a podcast is supposed to be conversational, but it becomes more like an interview, and I enjoy conversations more, clearly. So this was so much fun. Like, I learned about you, and that's what I loved most about it. And secondly, I have to say that I love what you're doing, and that's the other thing
Thank you.
that really made me very excited to join you and have this conversation with you. Because when I saw your post about what the MidVibe is all about, the one thing that really stuck with me is that more people need to know about the story, the middle of the story.
Yeah.
And it goes right into a belief that I've had for the longest time, which is that I think too many of us today wait for us to have written the entire book to share our story with the world.
True.
Whereas I'm learning more and more that even if you're on the second page of your book, you have the ability to share that story with someone who's on the first page, and it will make a whole lot of difference for them. And I think what you're doing with the MidVibe is probably exactly that. So more power to you, and more love
Thank
to you,
you.
and so excited for wherever this goes.
This means so much to me, and you actually gave me more words to define what MidVibe is all about. So thanks to you as well.
I'm grateful. I'm very
And
grateful.
in fact, if not that you asked me, but I will answer it. What I gained out of this entire conversation for MidVibe, if I would be very specific, it would be that I actually now know how to move forward with other conversations that I'll be having tomorrow, next weekend. It's like I learned so much.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. I'm really, really glad. And thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for your
Thank
time,
you.
and thank you for doing what you're doing.
And let's hope to connect soon again, maybe via live circles or any of your activities. And for
100%.
everyone who's listening or watching, please do check out his website. His page is just beautiful. You have so many important insights to learn. It's just amazing.
Thank
You
you.
should check it out. Thank you, Siddharth.
No problem. Have a wonderful Friday. It's Friday, right? Yeah. Have a wonderful
Friday,
Friday.
Friday.
Take care, Ashna. Thank you. This was
Take
fun.
care. Bye.
Bye.